But we're going to move forward without him as president. That's apparent. And everything he does is not making it any better. It's making it worse. And just making people want him out of office even more, and to never return to office or be eligible even to return to office. We're going to cut to a break. Another break. It's very short. Very short. But we'll be right back right after this.
And now, without further ado, the man we've all been waiting for, T-Jam D. Welcome back to the show.
Welcome back to the show. There's one thing I forgot to mention. I meant to mention it right at the top, but this whole insurrection thing, I had to jump right in after I wasted the time talking about coronavirus, which I have no choice but to mention Corona on the Bona. But I usually try to mention, any celebrities that I've heard of that have passed away since the last time I talked to you. And the one person that I've heard, if there's someone else that I've missed, I'll tell you about that the next podcast. But the one that I've heard is Tommy Lasorda. Tommy Lasorda, for those of you who don't know, who the hell's Tommy Lasorda? He was a manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Los Angeles Dodgers, formerly known as the Brooklyn Dodgers before any of us were born, was a professional MLB baseball team that moved from Brooklyn to Los Angeles probably over 50 years ago. I know that. But anyway, Tommy Lasorda managed the LA Dodgers. He was a very good manager, a very popular manager, and he passed away at the age of 93. So condolences to the friends and family of Tommy Lasorda, Hall of Famer, manager for the LA Dodgers. He will be missed. Moving on. I guess I'm going to say a little bit about sports, even though, because the Ohio State Buckeyes still have yet to play the national championship game against Alabama. The college football national championship game between the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, last time I had this podcast, I do believe I said that the Buckeyes were going to play Clemson, the Clemson Tigers, who, to remind you of the conversation, if you're listening again, the Clemson Tigers are coached by Dabo Swinney. It's a team that is a very good team. Dabo Swinney is a good coach. He's they're usually right at the top of the rankings every year, and they usually make the playoffs. The college football playoffs only has 4 teams in it. There's hundreds, actually, of college teams that are eligible, but usually they only have 4 teams. Not usually, all the time. That's the format until they change it, that there's 4 teams, and usually Clemson makes the playoffs every year. So Clemson has made the playoffs. Ohio State makes the playoffs sometimes. They've won the national championship since they've had this format of the college football playoffs. In their history, the Buckeyes have won the national championship several times, but they didn't have the playoff. They just used to choose 2 teams to play the national championship, and they were trying to choose the best 2 college football teams in the country to play against each other for the national championship in the past, before the playoffs. Now, the Alabama usually also makes the playoffs perennially. Two of those spots are preserved for Clemson and Alabama because those teams usually are good enough to be in the playoffs. Now, the Buckeyes have probably been in the playoffs 3 or 4 times, but not every year. They're not in there every year. They're in there. But mostly it's those 3 teams fighting it out for the championship. But mostly it's just Clemson and Alabama, and they've had several games against each other. And this year, the Buckeyes beat Clemson. This is the first time the Buckeyes had beaten Clemson. The Buckeyes have only played Clemson 4 times in their history because Clemson is an ACC school, and they don't play ACC schools that often. And when they have played other ACC schools, it hadn't been Clemson. They hadn't played the whole conference. So the matchup was rare for it to even happen, but just so happens that the Buckeyes have been pitted against Clemson 4 times in bowl games, and they've lost 3 times. This last week, when they beat Clemson in the playoff game, which was also a bowl game, that was the first time they beat Clemson. And I told you that they would beat Clemson because they had some extra motivation, because the coach of Clemson, now they deny it. He denied it. He's like, that didn't have anything to do with it. But I beg to differ, sir, because these players are human beings. And when you insult human beings, they usually that sparks something inside of you when someone insults you. You may or may not do anything about it, but if you have to play against that person or people, there's some extra incentive for you to win. The coach of Clemson, Dabo Swinney, said that the Buckeyes didn't belong in the playoffs and that they are probably the 11th best team in the nation, which is nonsensical. And they proved that last year by beating Clemson. The only problem is, I don't know if they'll have the same motivations to beat Alabama, but we'll see. The championship game is coming up on Monday night. So I'm rooting for the Buckeyes. Go Buckeyes. That's the team I like and root for in college football. And my Cowboys never made it to the playoffs. They had their chance. They could have been 7-9 and made it to the playoffs, but that would have, been below 500. That wouldn't even have, I've seen teams that were 8-8 make it to the playoffs in professional football in the NFL, and I thought, wow, what a sucky division if you're making it to the playoffs at 8-8. So, but we've seen, Seattle make it to the playoffs at 7-9. So it wouldn't have been the first time. But they didn't win the game anyway, so they didn't even end up being 7-9. They ended up being 6-10. So they suck and don't deserve to be in the playoffs. The Washington football team, formerly known as the Washington Redskins, did make the playoffs, and they lost yesterday to Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But they were the winners of their division, the NFC East. Washington was. They were 7-9. But the funny thing is that the Giants could have made the playoffs being 6-10 if Philadelphia had beat Washington. Now, that didn't happen. But it would have been even worse if a 6-10 team was in the playoffs. And the coach for the Giants had the nerve to criticize the coach for Philadelphia because he took out his starting quarterback and put a backup quarterback in the fourth quarter when they were only losing by 3 points. But Subsequently, that caused them to lose the game because the backup quarterback was not nearly as good and didn't finish the game very strongly, and they ended up losing. And my advice to the coach of the Giants is, if you are worried about going to the playoffs, win more than 6 games. Don't blame anybody else. Okay, you can't win 6 games and then throw a fit about what someone else is doing. Shut the fuck up and win some more games. And that's really all you got to do. All right, moving on. That's sports. That's sports. Now, with a few minutes left here, I meant to talk about this. I want to mention that the Georgia Senate runoffs didn't get much attention because of this whole insurrection by Trump and the fact that Trump's a dumbass who causes a huge problem everywhere he goes, and everything he does it's all about Trump. Trump. He's selfish and an idiot. So those two things, when you're a rich and powerful idiot who's very selfish, it usually doesn't turn out that well. Warnock and Ossoff are the Democrats who won the seats, the Senate seats in Georgia in the runoff. Both the Democrats, they won those Senate seats, Warnock and Ossoff. I think his name is David Ossoff, Raphael Warnock. But they defeated Kelly Loeffler, a tall blonde lady who was not a bad looking chick, but she's a terrible person, greedy. Probably going to have some investigation into insider trading, her and David Perdue. Yeah, also a greedy jackass. So down with Loeffler and Perdue, and welcome to the Senate, Warnock and Ossoff. That causes the Democrats to have the majority by 1 when anything that's voted on in the Senate, Kamala Harris will be the deciding vote if it's a tie. So that happened. Had the big important runoff in Georgia. Warnock and Ossoff won, and that information has been sort of glossed over because of what happened following that runoff with Biden, the election being certified, and then the insurrection that happened, and now the possibility of Trump being impeached for the second time is also going down. I had something else I wanted to talk about, but we're almost out of time, so I won't be able to get to talk about it until the next podcast. So don't miss the next podcast, and I'll give you a hint on what it was. It has to do with white supremacy, and I wanted to talk about it this show, but I don't get to do it because we're almost out of time. I only do these podcasts for 1 hour at a time. They're not live, they're posted. But white supremacy is still on the docket for me to talk about. I'm going to try to get to that. I've wasted so much time talking about this other nonsense. The coronavirus. I know a lot of you are saying the coronavirus is not nonsense. Yes, but I talk about that all the time. I mean, we don't have any choice. Everybody talks about it in the media and on any platform that people have. They talk about the coronavirus. They talk about the coronavirus because that's what's going on in our society.